25, right? 25. 25. No, $20 is supposed to be going back. You know, it has to be right amount.
Take the switch today and join our news revolution. Get Newsmax on cable, on streaming, and download the free app today. It takes just seconds to start. Let President Trump know you stand with Newsmax. It's for real news, for real people. Make the switch today.
This hour is sponsored by Mullen & Mullen Injury Law Firm, 660 AM. The Answer. From Vegas and industry.
Blessed are those whose help is the God of Jacob, whose help is the Lord their God. He is the maker of heaven and earth, the sea, and everything in them. He remains faithful forever. He upholds the cause of the oppressed and gives food to the hungry. The Lord sets the prisoner free. So that is not saying that princes can do nothing, that we don't have any role when it comes to helping the oppressed and giving the food, when it comes to helping the oppressed or giving the hungry food. But that is to say that we need to have a proper understanding of God's role when it comes to ordering our national affairs and our role, man's role. So as always, I start off this program with the co-anchor of the show, Josh Wood, my executive director. Josh, what are your thoughts on putting our trust in princes? And how is it that we get that wrong, maybe on the left and the right today?
Well, so that's the question. When the Bible tells us not to put our trust in princes, but in the Lord, what do we do with that? Does that mean we don't engage? That and I think this is like, Katie, I think we're all wrestling with that right now. Do you go Rod Dreher, Benedict option, circle the wagons, and build away from everyone else, the parallel polis? Or do you go full steam ahead into culture, fight the culture war, slash and burn, ends justify the means, and we get all we can out of politics because there's something to be gained there? And so I'd be curious just to know, I mean, you live in Seattle, you are engaging in the culture. You certainly haven't retreated to your safe sanctuary. I think I would be curious to know, because I think this is the question of the hour. What role does politics play in the advancement of God's kingdom for the Christian? Is it nothing? Is it everything? Is it somewhere in between?
That is the real question, isn't it? And I think that the balance comes when you recognize that there are some parts of government affairs that are really God's alone to determine. You can look on maybe just the election results of this last week. You can look at the rise and fall of civilizations, and you can say that there's some aspect of that is God ordained, that has to do with his sovereignty. But his sovereignty is not the only part of the story. He does expect us to be people that will advance justice in the public square, people that will punish the wicked and reward the good. That is what a just government requires. And God himself does not sit on the throne of the governor's office or in the state house of representatives. Those are things that he asks us to do. That's one aspect of the salt and light that he expects from his people. So to me, I think that we get this wrong when we think God is not involved at all, or we should not be involved at all. The way that we're going to get this exactly right, for us to not trust in princes, but maybe sometime to aspire to be the prince or the president or the school board member, is to recognize what role we have and to do it with excellence. And what role belongs to God, and not try to touch or control the things that only God can ordain.
For me, it's an issue of identity that I think we would all agree. We have to be governed first and foremost by our identity in heaven, citizenship to another kingdom, Christ is Lord, all of that. I think that's got to be first. But I think I see two strategies, Katie, where I feel like people are getting it wrong. I think culture will challenge and try to displace that identity. So some of those displacing identities would be things like race, gender, class, I think ethnicity, national origin, even sometimes like tribe within religion. I think that would be what I would say would displace. So can they get the Christian to make a decision based on what is best for or an allegiance to one of those identities? My sexual orientation. Again, sometimes we look like hearing on a sexual orientation on top of my allegiance to Christ. They may say, well, I'm going to kind of try to reinterpret things down the road in my biblical, worldview, because I've got this identity now first. It's like, this is the most important thing about me. Everything comes second. So displace. The second, though, I think is distort. And I think we've seen this one quite a bit. This is a trick of, I think, maybe if I haven't thought this all the way through, but I think conservatives, they do sometimes have challenges with the displacement. I think I've seen a lot lately, and especially coming out of January 6th, the rise of the term Christian nationalism and the attempt to distort what it meant to be Christian. So you see people saying, well, if you were a Christian, then you would. I mean, do you remember a board that said, love your neighbor? And it was an advocacy for taking someone to an abortion. Like, that's what that meant. I think it was Gavin Newsom in California. Or care for the poor by having an open border. So if we can't get you to achieve our political aims outright, to say, this is a progressive thing I need you to support, well, then I'll try to go through the door you've opened. And I'm a Christian. Christ is Lord. Allegiance is there. Well, look, if you're really a Christian, this is all the things you have to do for me too. And I'm going to use empathy. I'm going to use compassion against you to achieve my political aim. So I think when I think about putting my hope in something, and I think politics is just one of those arenas where people are trying to get us to do things, testing our allegiances. We have to make good choices and engage. And it's really hard to keep and make sure that fidelity to the gospel and to Christ as Lord stays at the top of that hierarchy.
Mm-hmm. That is true, right? We cannot insert ourselves where we don't belong, but we can't withdraw where we should engage. And I do think that the story of the election this week is one where Christians have withdrawn. And I think that they have withdrawn in two ways. I mean, what we saw were these really significant victories in Virginia, in New Jersey, in New York, in California. Virginia voted down Winsome Sears, who I just think is an absolute boss. I mean, I know boss girl is not something we conservatives like, but God, if I wanted a boss girl, it would totally be Winsome Sears. I just think that she is fantastic. And on that whole white identitarian politics, I saw something that showed white evangelicals went 80% for Winsome Sears, right? Like, we very clearly are not the racist party. We're not the ones going, oh, we won't vote. We just want people with great ideas. She had great ideas. Unfortunately, she lost. Same thing with the New Jersey governor race, which up until election day looked as though it was very tight. It ended up not being very tight. The conservative candidate lost, unfortunately, because I have friends in New Jersey that are being crushed under the load of their second mortgage, also known as property taxes in New Jersey. And then, of course, New York City elected an open socialist to run the financial hub of the world. You could talk about it that way. And you already have a huge percentage of New Yorkers that vowed that they would just have to leave the city if he won, and understandably so, whether they're police officers, whether they are people who are the top income earners who pay the vast majority of taxes, who are now going to flee the state. And now I wonder how Mondani is going to be able to fund all of the free buses and the state-controlled grocery stores that he is plotting. And then the California effort to redistrict, in essence, carves the state up in a way that will further marginalize the pretty substantial amount of Republicans. I mean, I think that California is about 45% Republican, but if you carve up those lanes in just the right way, you can, in essence, marginalize them out of significance when it comes to voting. So what we saw really was, I think, Christians did not show up in those. And I think a lot of that is because Christians moved out. They moved out of California. They've moved out of New York. They've moved out of New Jersey. I know people that have fled, Christians, conservatives who have fled all of those states because it got very uncomfortable. And I'm not going to diminish the discomfort. I mean, when you have states like Washington that will literally facilitate your minor child to emancipate themselves so they can get a gender transition above your objection. I understand wanting to flee those states, but on the other hand, it is very hard when the Christian presence physically withdraws or spiritually withdraws. And I'll tell you what, if you want to talk about ways to love your neighbor, it is to make the state you live in better, not to flee to a state where it's more comfortable for you. So what are your thoughts on the how the election went, Josh?
Well, your thought is interesting. I do think these states, I think they were a foregone conclusion in large part. I think Glenn Youngkin got elected in Virginia in 2021 because they had shut down schools unnecessarily for way too long, and people were fed up with it, and people showed up. I personally think, though, Katie, you're probably right that these are a foregone conclusion because so many people have left. I mean, Ron DeSantis was talking about the number of NYPD officers that have gotten in the state of Florida now because people just don't want to put up with it. And so, but I think your question then is a tactical one. As Christians, when do you know when to call it? To say, I am getting out of Dodge. I'm not going to, Bodie Baucham said you don't, something like you don't train, you don't send your kids to Rome and expect them to come back as anything but Romans. Like, I think there is that resonates with me. Maybe I'm a little more on that category where I'm going to go somewhere where I have a chance to build. I'm in North Carolina. We're not exactly, deep red, but we're a pretty conservative state that aligns with my Christian values, with good, strong churches, and a lot of the stuff you talk about in the experience of Washington, we don't have. But if I were called to a Seattle or, somewhere in California, how would that feel? What would be my engagement? Would I seek out Christian institutions to protect my kids within those places? I think this is the question of the time, Katie. I think the culture war is not an optional thing. It's like the family from Massachusetts, I think it was, that they were unable to foster kids after 8 years of fostering because the state deemed what is essentially their religious beliefs about sex, gender, marriage, etc., to be antithetical to the state creed, and now they are unable to serve in a way God's called them. The culture war came to them. And so again, I don't think we can opt out as Christians anymore. We just have to develop a philosophy of how we are going to engage.
I am not saying there's never a time to leave. I think especially if there is a direct threat to your children, it could be a child protection issue for you no longer to live in that jurisdiction, that state, that city. I totally understand. I have had friends that have moved, but I will also say that Christians are called to clear and courageous action. We are the ones that, this is going to go one way or the other. Either Christianity will influence the nation or the nation will influence Christianity. You have to choose. There's no way that you can, there is no Benedictine option where you cloister yourself in the hills and say, don't touch us. Even though I don't think that's what Roger exactly was saying, but that there is a mentality, a Benedict mentality of, I'm just going to move to a red state, homeschool my children, no one's ever going to touch them, we're not going to have any kind of interaction with the world. And you actually might grow a child that is not then co-opted into being a blue-haired activist. That is possible. But I will also argue that you're not loving your neighbor that way. Your neighbor actually needs your engagement. The secular world that hates you actually needs you to be the salt and light as it relates to a proper understanding of the nature of government, the history of this nation, free market principles, biological reality, real genuine visions of equality across races and gender, not in the critical race theory sense, not in the critical feminist theory sense, in the biblical theory sense. That's where you're really going to see true liberation, and you're going to see true prosperity that happens through Christian engagement. And there's no other way around it. And so wherever you are, you must engage. I think that there's a case to be made for staying where you are and fighting it out, because the alternative is people that are unaware and have less political capital are going to pay the price when we withdraw. Stay with us. We'll be back with more news headlines.
Children around the world are being victimized. We need your help. Them Before Us is a global nonprofit dedicated to defending children's life, family, and body. But we can't do it alone. If you've been called to protect children, please consider making a donation to support our vital work. Your will support the education and training of pastors, legislators. Visit thembeforeus.com/donate today and join us in our campaign to protect kids.
This is Abraham Hamilton III with AFR, and we're sending Bibles. Here's Michael with Bible League International.
Abraham, there's a crisis around the world. You know, in many parts of Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America, only 1 in 10 Christians has a Bible. What's that mean? It means the majority of believers cannot do what you and I do on a daily basis, and that's open God's Word and be reminded of His precious promises, like in 1 Peter 5:7, cast your cares on Him, for He cares for you. Hey, here's the reaction of a senior saint in South Africa who finally received her Bible.
She literally knelt down, cried. At the age of 60, she never had a Bible. It is so much fulfilling just to see people rejoicing when they receive their Bible.
Our goal by the end of November is to put tears of joy on the faces of 6,000 Bibleless believers in the Middle East and other parts of the world. We're a little behind, so would you pray and get involved?
$5 sends a Bible. $100 sends 20. $500 sends 100. Give by calling 800 Yes Word. 800 Yes Word. Or visit Send Bibles Now. That's sendbiblesnow.org.
Your Caregiver Minute with Peter Rosenberg.
Much of the heartache I've endured as a caregiver has resulted from my unwillingness to accept things as they are. A friend recently told me acceptance doesn't mean agreement. I may not agree with or like what I have to carry, witness, but I can accept that it is while enduring it. That doesn't mean it's fatalistic, just means it's realistic. My wife helped teach me this when she lost both of her legs. She didn't like being a double amputee, but it became her new reality, and striving against it or wishing something different wasn't going to bring legs. We can accept things without agreeing with them. And in the process, we can live a little more peaceful with the often chaotic events in our life.
Hope for the Caregiver with Peter Rosenberger. Saturday mornings at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on American Family Radio.
Did you know Them Before Us has a free small group curriculum designed specifically for churches? Our 7-part video series addresses marriage, divorce, same-sex parenting, IVF, surrogacy, adoption, and more. This study is the perfect way to train believers in your community on why God's design for family is Plan A for child protection. To learn more, visit thembeforeus.com/small group or visit thembeforeus.com/donate to make a financial gift. Welcome back to Them Before Us on American Family Radio.
We're back with Them Before Us Radio. I'm your host, Katie Faust, here with the executive director of Them Before Us, Josh Wood, and we're going to talk about a few other stories that caught our eye this week. The first one is called What Anti-Adoption Movements Get Wrong. So at Them Before Us, we are pro-adoption. We understand that adoption is an institution that seeks to restore something that a child has lost. And we understand that it is redemptive in that aspect when it's properly understood. But we also understand that adoption does not fix everything. There are, as an adoptive mother, I often say, my child has lost some things for which I cannot fully compensate. Adoption begins with loss. Loss that I think could appropriately be called trauma. Maybe trauma is an understatement for the kind of loss that the child experienced by being separated from not just the only person, the only thing that they know, the day that they are born, and then having to really start the clock at 0 where all the other babies in their life have a 9.5-month head start. And so there are areas where, especially because we can see that adoptees do not fare as well on a lot of different metrics when it comes to educational outcomes, when it comes to emotional outcomes, even though we do our very, very best to screen and vet people with whom adopted children are placed, even in terms of safety and love, those children do not fare as well. So far, there is no other assembly for a household that benefits a child more than their own mother and father, loving them and loving each other every single day. So in light of some of those diminished outcomes, those critiques that have now come up in the adoption world, there's now sort of an anti-adoption movement. And there was a story about this at the Institute for Family Studies this week. So Josh, do you want to tell us a little bit about this movement and what the article had to say?
Yeah, so, there is an anti-adoption movement online, and it's going to take those horrific cases and use them to paint a narrative of all adoption as exploitation. And so this article from Institute of Family Studies, IFS, who does great work. Like if we can plug them, these guys and Brad Wilcox, all that they do, you should be checking out, following them on social media, get on their email list. They're constantly producing such great family content and data around it. Again, like they do a lot of work for us. It feels like it's just backing up a lot of what we know to be, because when a child's right to their mother and father is preserved, defended, and promoted, kids do best. They flourish. So really this article is trying to push back against that movement and show that there are difficult cases where there is exploitation that occurs, but there are decades of research. There's decades of research showing that adoptees thrive, and I think we probably need to qualify what thriving means, but thrive when placed in stable, loving homes. Data reveals differences in outcomes are usually tied to pre-adoption trauma, not adoption itself, and we need to have a child-centered conversation that does give compassion, a hearing, but also truth. And I think, Katie, that's probably the hard part of this conversation. I know we even get sometimes pushback from adoption groups when we talk about the fact that adoption involves loss for a child. We don't ever, and I don't think you'll ever hear us talk about adoption being to use religious language. Adoption is not God's plan A. That we believe that God intends for mothers and fathers to raise their children, and I think unfortunately we have been forced in culture into such an untenable position where quite frankly the death culture that exists around abortion has made it so that just convincing someone to make the courageous choice to have the child and put it up for adoption just seems like such an unbelievable win. And I think we'd all agree that does feel like a win. It is. I mean, I guess, yeah, it is. But it's hard to say when you are also dealing with the child losing a connection to their biological parents. A lot of times the mother's doing it by themselves, so they're already losing contact with a dad in the best case in that situation. Now they're going to lose contact with their mom, and they're going to get put into a completely different situation. And the data shows that is traumatic. Even when you learn about it later in life, it's kind of hard for us to read back into these things and say, how would I feel if I found out right now that I had been given up at birth or abandoned? That would be, I don't think we can properly put ourselves in the shoes of people who have struggled through that. But that loss is really significant. But that in this situation, it says that children will thrive. They thrive when adopted, because in my mind, when you find out about that wound, adoption involves two people who spent money, prayed, went through background checks, spent years oftentimes praying to try to create the type of intentional environment where they knew you had a safe place to process what they knew you would inevitably go through. Am I reading that wrong? That's what I feel like is the big benefit, is that, hey, when your world falls apart and you have to figure out what happened and struggle with your origin story, at least you have two people who have a demonstrated track record of love, trust, and investment in you, who did this to make sure this was the best possible situation you could have had given the circumstances.
Yeah, I think that we need to begin with the place that in a perfect world, we wouldn't ever have adoption. We wouldn't need adoption. There would be no child who is going to lose their mother or father because of adoption. We do not live in that perfect world. Because we do not live on that perfect world, because some